Hello and welcome to Manx Radio. I'm our election producer Amy Griffiths and this is our general election candidate interview series. On Thursday the 24th of September, the island will head to the polls to decide who'll have a seat in the House of Keys for the next 5 years. To help you make up your mind, we've asked all those standing to take part in a 30-minute interview. Up next is Aishlinn Creer, who's standing in Garff. She's been speaking to Sam Turton.
Today I'm talking to Aishlinn Creer, who is seeking election in Garff. First time you're standing in a general election, but you have been elected to local authority about 2 years ago, was it?
No, so I joined the board of Garff Commissioners in 2021. I currently serve as Vice Chair, recently been elected in May of this year. So yeah, I've got 5 years of local government experience behind me now.
And why is it that you want to go from local authority to the national and the general?
I think, to be honest, I've never really had any aspiration to be an MHK, but I think like lots of residents, we're kind of watching the island floundering of late. And I think unless we get new people in there, if we keep electing the same people that we've had, we're not going to be able to do anything different. So I just feel now, if I don't do it now, I'll probably regret it further down the line. You know, you'll be one of those people sort of sitting back and thinking, why are they doing that? And why aren't we doing this? And so, yeah, I kind of don't want to be in that position where I find myself regretting maybe not being brave enough to put my head above the parapet and saying, right, OK, let's give this a try.
We have seen a few candidates come forward who are members of local authorities at the minute across the island. Do you think that gives a good grounding for going into national politics?
I think it certainly does, actually, to be honest, because one of the things, having spent a lot of my career in the private sector, going into sort of local authority or government, you suddenly realise there's a massive difference in how things are done. And one of the things I find is how long everything takes to do. So sort of being in the local authority has given me the experience of learning to be patient and to realise maybe things don't happen quite as quickly as I would like them to happen. But I think, if you want to see change in anything, if you want to improve the communities and the areas that you live in, then you have to get involved in it.
So what would be, I suppose just to start with, you got your manifesto in front of you, what would be your sort of the main area you think going into this is the most important for you?
That's actually quite a hard question. I think obviously, you look at issues like health, education, we're failing in all of those at the moment as well. But I think we have to talk about Morvan and Wind Farm. We have to. It's the biggest decision our island's going to make in generations. And I think, obviously, it's been a very long, detailed process. And as I say, coming back to the Board of Garff Commissioners, we've done a lot of work on it. We've read thousands and thousands of pages of documents. We've attended every single MEMA examining board meeting presentation. We had representatives there. I was one of them at the Groudle viewing with the examining board and with Orsted, talking through the proposal of allegedly bringing, a pipeline through to provide energy to the island. So we've been massively involved in this, and I think it's one of those issues that you can't not talk about. If you're speaking to people on the doorsteps, it's one of the main issues that they're talking about. And I just feel that the government have been very quiet on it. And I think it's too big to not be quiet on. So, yeah, I've maybe put my head above the parapet and not ignored the AG's advice, which is not to offer a definite opinion of what I think about it. But like I say, I will stay true to myself and I have to have an opinion on it. And my opinion is I don't support the Morvan proposal.
Perhaps more in Garff than any other constituency that the issue is because of the geography of it. Yeah. It's sort of made it essential. Do you think that it's something that people, whether candidates are for or against it, it is something that has rankled people a little bit, this advice from the AG's chambers, that it shouldn't be talked about in such a way in case someone ends up as a minister? I
think so. And I think one of the things that you know yourself, that you expect your representatives to be able to speak openly and to give a view on important issues that impact everybody. And like you say, obviously you look at the Garff demographic and people think, they're just complaining because it's going to be in their front garden. It isn't that at all. It's more than that. But I think the AG's advice, I almost feel like it's a bit like a get out of jail free card for our current administration, because they're not allowed to offer an opinion on it, or they use it as an excuse not to offer an opinion up on it. But like I say, it will be the biggest question that certainly within Garff, I think anyone will get asked is, where do you stand on the wind farm?
I think if you go back to 2021, the sort of Garff had another big national but also very local issue to deal with regarding the sewage works that was ongoing, and that's now progressing to a point with the plan for Axtonfell. Do you think this is perhaps taking people more in the constituency than that did?
I think they're both really important. I think, and I think, as you say, the big issues that for a local authority like Garff is taking up a lot of time. But of course, they're things that will impact our lives for future generations. It's not just a case of like the here and now. It's things that, the sewage treatment, something has got to be done. We cannot live in a society in 2026 where we still discharge raw sewage into our bay. It's not just in Laxey, it's also in Garwick. We've got the kind of the double-edged sword, if you like, of it. So it's good to see that a plan has progressed. Is it a viable plan? I don't really know. But I think for me now, I got to a point where I had to, again, make a decision on that from a commissioner point of view. And what slightly tipped the balance, and it was very much 50-50 with it, was what tipped the balance was we can't do nothing about this. We can't have our beach, the jewel in Garff's crown are the beaches. We've got the Dune, we've got Cornay, we've got Laxey. And, we have to sell them. And one thing we have to sell is clean water.
And so just to give an opportunity really to be as clear as you can be on this, Morvan, if you were given the option tomorrow, yes or no?
It would be a no.
It would be a no, definitely.
Yeah, it would, yeah.
I suppose we stay with the constituency. You talk about in your manifesto about Garff has some of the best footpaths and also it's rich in heritage and this should be protected, and where more can be done to increase visitor numbers. Do you mean to the island as a whole on our heritage, or is this specifically in Garff?
I think it's our heritage island wide is phenomenal, isn't it? We have Laxey Wheel, we have Cash Lanard, we have Peel Castle, we have where every sort of area has an amazing sense of history, and I think that's a really important part of what makes the Isle of Man unique. Obviously we've just celebrated 150 years of the Douglas horse trams. There's nowhere else certainly not in the UK that has that kind of history and heritage that we have. So we've got to do more, I think, to get our visitor numbers up, because the island has a lot to offer, but more and more people are. Obviously we've got a fantastic outdoors element here on the island. Are we selling that enough? We've just got to get more people here to enjoy the beauty and the splendour that we do every day.
Well, we do move into that pretty handily, actually, because you talk about the transport links to the island.
Yes.
As well in your manifesto, say about the steam packet needs to look at further competitive prices to encourage tourists to visit. At present, the cost is excessive, and while supporting operators' profits, the steam packet reports operating profits. More work needs to be done to bring people to our shores.
Yeah.
It does come, though, however, just as Visit Isle of Man's report, a 6.9% rise.
Yes, this was written. This was probably written about 5 weeks ago. So yes, we've obviously have increased visitor numbers, which is great. But we also kind of have to look at it the other way, and we need to be able for our residents to be able to afford to leave the Isle of Man. Sometimes the steam packet fares are not competitive. They're really, really expensive, and you can be on the boat, and you could be chatting to the man next to you who's paid 30% less than you've paid for your ticket. And I get it's supply and demand, but I do think resident rates needs to be a consideration for the steam packet. I really do. It's at the end of the day, it's a taxpayer-owned company. We should be doing more. We shouldn't have people that can't afford to leave the island to go away because the cost of getting off is just too expensive.
And is that something that you think, if that was to be brought forward, was that something you think should be a steam packet fund, or is that something where the government would have to offer some form of payment or system in place for residents for the steam packet to use?
I think this should be something the steam packet maybe look to do. Obviously, the steam packet do a lot of fantastic sponsoring of, teams like football teams or any teams that go away. They offer them, transport off the Isle of Man. And I'm not sure if it's free, so please forgive me if I say it's free and it actually isn't. It's maybe subsidised. But I do think we could look to be subsidising residents leaving as well.
And down at the airport, it's I think it's not unfair to say the airport's had a challenging few years.
Yes, I think I would agree with you there.
What more do you think could be done at Ronald's Way around? We basically have 3 companies flying out here at the minute. Do you think there is more potential for growth from air travel?
I think so, yes, definitely. But I think obviously the issues with, that, like you've just touched on, the historical issues are well documented, the air traffic controllers, that kind of thing. But hopefully if we can get those kind of things resolved, we have the option to have loads more routes. We're quite a central island in a way. We're not far. Obviously you've got fantastic routes to Liverpool, to Manchester and places like that. But I'm sure there's other places that we could also look to explore to do. And if we're known to be reliable and the airport is efficient, and, you know, I'm sure other regional airlines could look to start maybe coming here. I mean, I don't know, you know, but you'd like to think we would be open to those kind of discussions. Rather than losing airlines, we need to be maybe encouraging more airlines here.
Well, staying with infrastructure and the Department of Infrastructure, which you're quite... I feel so another word other than a bit blunt about, really. So you say it's failing.
It is failing. I do think it is. You know, we raise something like between 13 and 14 million pound a year through vehicle duty. Why is that money not reinvented back into the road system? Our roads, honestly, if you drive around probably 80% of the roads, with the exception of the mountain, which seems to get all the money and all the time spent on it, you know, we're failing. I was down in Macclesfield the other day at Dreamscary Road. Now, Macclesfield is one of the most beautiful parts on the Isle of Man. And literally driving Dreamscary is like driving on a ploughed field. It's terrible. And, you know, we need to know what the plans are. You know, what's the highway strategy? Is there even a highway strategy? I don't think there is a highway strategy. Maybe there needs to be, you know. But I think also as well, to me, one of the failings I feel with the DOI is it's actually too big. The remit that they cover just doesn't mean that, it just kind of means that things are not necessarily getting done properly. So is it time we just break the chunks off, you know? So I know there was talk of taking government estates and moving them maybe out into a separate sort of pile, if you like, you know, because I think, as I say, there's just too much. The remit is just too broad. So it's how do they focus on key things when, you know, obviously I'm sure we're going to touch on housing. I'm sure we're going to touch on other things, but it all falls under that DOI umbrella.
So is that, just before we move on from that, just you said about restructuring the DOI, that would inevitably end up with restructuring in other areas. I know there's talk about the heritage moving out of DOI, like the railways moving into DFE as part of tourism, for example. Is that something that you think the island needs as a broader look across all of government at what departments are doing? I
think so. I think it's, you know, obviously we talk about, and obviously you'll touch on the size of the civil service, but it's almost like they're trying to just find a few headers for things like DEFA or DOI or Department of Enterprise. You know, it's maybe just needs to be a little bit broader than that. That sort of more things can have a more specified. I kind of know what I mean. I'm maybe not explaining it to you particularly very well here, but I just feel that you can't just keep clumping big things together. There needs to be a bit more of a sort of a breakdown. And I don't think that necessarily means you need to increase headcount or anything like that. I believe there would be enough people within the civil service that you could just have these teams slightly smaller. You know, obviously when we think back to, let's use the flooding as an example, in Laxey, Manx Utilities were responsible for river maintenance. Then they created a flood management division, which took all of that away. Does it work well under the DOI? Not convinced. You know, obviously I had a lot of dealings with them through the flooding. So, yeah, I almost feel like there needs to be a complete overview of structure within government as a whole, really. You've obviously got that new lady, Grace, the chief people lady that's gone in. Sorry, I don't know her surname. Will she be able to maybe look at that and look at how government is set out at the moment and say, actually, we might be better just to break things down a little bit and, you know, maybe help streamline it? I don't know.
Well, sticking in with, since you're on housing, if we go into housing, I think people are very, you know, they're well aware of the issues in social housing. There's waiting lists in private sector. There's what people would view as high rental charges in a lot of places. But you talk about what's really caught my eye was the lack of progress and implementation with the Landlord Registration Act, which at the minute still hasn't come in. It was 2021.
2021, yeah.
And you say about this, this must be implemented and signed up to by all landlords with no exceptions. That at the time was met with a lot of concerns from landlords about what that would do to the cost of renting on the island. Is that something that you think is a danger that's worth going down that road? I think if, you know, sometimes you look at obviously the cost of private rental. And let's just look at private rental just for the moment. You know, it's extortionately expensive, but you have no kind of control about the condition of the properties that people can rent for these extortionate prices. So I think we have to have a balance there. There has to be a case of, okay, well, we agree to this. This is the condition that the properties we're allowed to rent out at.
Do we maybe set a price limit? I don't know. I don't know how that's kind of managed. There was a property for rent through an estate agent, which is up on the Westmoreland site, up on the nurses' home, just under £2,000 a month. Now that's a lot of money for somebody to find, isn't it? But obviously that's a brand new build, so you'd think, right, for that money you're getting a nice new house. But then you can maybe rent a flat, I don't know, let's just use Douglas as an example, and you could be paying £1,000, but the condition of it is abhorrent. It's full of damp, and how do you have that protection for tenants going into those kind of places? And I think there was an initial list, if I recall, it was a while ago I read that, but there was an initial list of people that the government had sort of identified that said they fell without outside of that. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, if it's a landlord and you're a landlord, then surely you should all work to the same legislation. That's kind of my thinking anyway.
So it's more about protecting renters, perhaps?
Definitely, yeah.
And you also touched on, like you said, a limited number of brownfield sites were identified by the government in 2020, in Garff in particular, for being developed, and land zoned for residential development needs to be developed, and affordable housing quotas delivered by developers as opposed to paying commuted sums to the DOI.
Yes.
The issue of commuted sums is one which I think is coming up regularly in this election.
Yes.
Is that something that people are mentioning? I think it's definitely something I've heard more over the past two years or so. Is that something that you're picking up as well?
Definitely, I think so, because I let you touch on before, there's lots of people struggling with housing on the Isle of Man right now, and I think we've got social housing in Laxey that's currently empty. Why is there such a long time for those social houses to be made up to standard and families put in them? We've got long lists of it. We're trying to build sheltered housing in Laxey for over 10 years. We've identified sites, we've done work around with the DOI, but they seem to be the stalling block, and as you say, developers need to be doing more. If we want to keep our small village communities, and we've identified brownfield sites within there, then we need to be developing that, because otherwise, you've put things like schools at risk, and, there's no sense. Like, take Glenmona. So there was a brownfield site identified in Glenmona that still hasn't actually been developed. Now, that's a beautiful little village that has a school, and in order to encourage families to stay there and to, put into the economy and to get children into the schools, they need houses there, and we haven't got that.
So what you talk about stumbling block with the DOI and government when with your Garff hat on,
yes.
Trying to, what is that? What is this? It gets to a certain point and then it fails, because all people will see is the commissioners have tried to do something and it hasn't gone anywhere. And
so we seem to be always constantly asked to be updating a business case or providing new financial costings, and obviously the longer that these kind of things are held back, the more the costings are going up. So obviously we had COVID and things like that, and obviously that's impacted massively. But I just feel that there is this urgent need for shelter. We don't manage our own social housing within Garff. It's all done through the DOI. But obviously we do have sheltered housing, and we have a list of people wanting sheltered housing. So you think, well, why are they not looking and saying, well, actually, Garff community, it was probably Laxey commissioners before it was Garff commissioners, had started this plan to build sheltered housing within Garff. Why is it stalled? Why is it still not done? And we've just recently had we had a meeting with the DOI minister, as was Tim Krukall, and we asked him and we said, look, where can you help us with this? Can you please just shibby things along for us? But like I say, there seems to be lots of hoops to jump through, which when they know that there's a problem, they should be maybe helping speed things up a little bit, just so we can start actually just, getting bricks in the ground and getting this accommodation built for people that need it. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have.
Well, moving on to another must have really is education. You mentioned the Department of Education, Sport and Culture failed twice to bring the Education Act Amendment Bill forward, largely due to pushback in Keys.
Keys, yeah.
What is it that you think, because you said earlier about education was failing, where do you think this is failing?
I just feel that, we've got more and more children not attending school, whether it's society problems, whether it's neurodivergent problems. And I think we have the government have a responsibility to provide education for children. It's a basic human right, isn't it? And I just think that we need to be doing more to cater for children who don't necessarily thrive within a classroom environment. They don't have the maybe not the capability, but, they don't have the means to thrive within that. So obviously I have a friend who has an autistic son, and she actually had to sell her home, leave the Isle of Man, and take him to Scotland to be educated, because we were not offering that kind of education on the Isle of Man. And I think we've got so many children waiting for diagnoses and things like that we have to be, but we still have to be able to offer them an education. And I just feel that, where, again, things just seem to stall almost. People have an idea, but then it doesn't seem to go over the finishing line. And I think that needs to happen.
So is that more where you'll consider line of education, and is I suppose the special needs provision? Definitely.
We need to be doing more. Like I say, not everybody, if I think back to when I was at school, everybody was in the classroom. There was no sort of, we didn't have special needs departments, and, we need to educate everybody. So whether you fall within the special needs services or whatever, you still need to be able to go to school.
And just, I suppose, feeding into that a little bit is the care element and the community element.
Yes.
Which leads into healthcare and Manx care.
Yes.
You have brought up the issue of the overspends that brought on in recent years, and I suppose the initial first thing on that is it an overspend or is it a lack of funding?
This is the question, isn't it? I think at the moment we sort of look at Manx care, and from an outsider looking in, we look at Manx care getting more and more money every year, but services not keeping up with that. And it's a case of, for me, I genuinely believe now is the time to go, right, we need to do a forensic audit of Manx care and say, where is all this money going? Is this money being allocated to the right places? Do we have sufficient front office staff? Have we got too many back office staff? And unless we do that, we have to realise that Manx care cannot have an open chequebook. They can't keep coming to Tynwald all the time going, we need another 30 million. We need to know exactly where we're failing with healthcare. And I think in some ways healthcare kind of scares me, because it should be everybody's right to have healthcare if it's needed. We shouldn't have people on waiting lists for years and years. How have we got to this place where, we can't provide healthcare for people? Obviously, we've got the issues of Ramsey Cottage Hospital closing, sections of Ramsey Cottage Hospital closing. What's going to happen with that? We're not very good at maintaining what we have sometimes on the island, and I think we need to just do better. But I think healthcare, without a doubt, is our biggest area for spend, and we just seem to be falling short with it.
You say in your manifesto as well about a full review of this is urgent required, so we can ensure resources. Do people want a review, or do they want somebody to come in and go, right, we've had the experts, as a government, we're setting a direction here? Do you think people want another review, basically?
I don't honestly know, but I think people want answers. And unless you do an audit review, how do we get answers? And I think it's as well, is there too much political interference within healthcare maybe? Do the government maybe need to take more of a step back, and we hand it over and we say, look, you're the doctors, you're the experts, you're the healthcares, you run this and tell us how you believe this should be ran. I'm not really close enough to that to kind of know, but I think there's just questions that need answering, and like I say, they're questions on the doorstep that are getting asked, and we don't have clear answers. But as I say, we cannot just keep giving Manx care a blank chequebook.
Yeah, and just I suppose we move on to an area which features prominently on that page as well, is border security.
Yes.
You talk about that with the common travel area, and we know that this is, in the past few years, has become the more scrutiny around the island being able to secure its own borders, especially we've seen an increased number in prosecutions for people bringing drugs to the island.
Yeah.
But also there's been, whether it's social media, whether it's genuinely borne out concerns, there seems to be a blend of the two, unfortunately, around immigration and people coming to the island who shouldn't be here, or people who don't have the right to remain, staying longer than they should. What is it you think that we need to be doing differently or ramping up?
I don't know, it's weird, isn't it? So I don't often travel by boat. 9 times out of 10, if I leave the Isle of Man, I go on a plane. And I always feel there's a bit more security around travelling by plane, whether that's just my interpretation of something. So I came back to the island on the boat in March of this year, and I was with some friends, and we'd been in Liverpool, and I checked a bag in at the steam packet, okay? And I said to the woman, do I need to provide you with any identification? And her response to me was, no, but they might ask you for that when you get to the Isle of Man. I thought, well, what a strange thing to say. I obviously live on the Isle of Man, that's where I'm going. But I almost felt like, so when we went upstairs, you obviously take your bags, you go up to the waiting area, and there was hundreds of people. So it was Manannan's first sailing from further summer, and it was rammed. So obviously, there's whatever the capacity is. They cherry pick people to put through a security check, and loads of people are just walking on through, and you're sort of thinking, how was everybody not checked? Obviously, if you go through an airport, everybody has security checks, but that doesn't happen at the steam packet. So I just felt a little bit kind of, for me, who's somebody who travels far and wide, I was a bit like, gosh, this seems a little bit lax, And as you say, obviously then we're reading in the paper about 3 illegal immigrants are deported from the Isle of Man. So I'm sort of thinking, well, do our border controls know who's coming in? You think when we, God, heavens forbid we ever go back to COVID days, but we knew who was leaving and who was coming back in. And we certainly don't have that now. And I think, obviously, I've just read recently the headline today of the border agency has just started to be rolled out, or it's going to be rolled out, and they're identifying the work that's done. And to me, it's just about making sure that works with the visa system, that they are actually, working together, so we can ensure that we don't have, like you say, people coming in that we don't know about. And, I'm sure it would be quite easy to get people into the Isle of Man, and we don't know they're here. So it's not about scaremongering anybody. It's not about saying, oh, we've got this major problem, because until we've got something like a border agency in place and we can identify, because obviously at the minute, if you come back on the boat and there's port police there, 9 times out of 10, they've had a tip off that somebody is coming over from the UK, and they'll say, oh, John Smith is coming in, and, and we believe he has drugs.
I'm just mindful of time as I look over my shoulder there. So I'll just go on to cost of living, and it is something, like you say, it's impacting many residents on the island, including most vulnerable of society. The administration has increased tax allowances and review undertaken on benefits. However, this means taking money from reserves to cover the shortfall. You asked the question of how do we replenish the reserves that previous administrations have been dipping into without hitting our most vulnerable. I suppose the not so simple question to you is how.
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And I think obviously we then have to look at growing our economy again. Our economy is stagnant now. I was a fatality of a redundancy from an e-gaming firm, and obviously that's a sector that's hit our economy hard. And I think if we can just find new ways of diversifying our economy, then hopefully we can start bringing more money back into the economy. People will be spending more, and of course that all adds up to more money for government again, doesn't it? And so yeah, it's kind of, you sometimes feel we're on a bit of a hamster wheel, aren't we? When we're kind of going round and round, and we're sort of almost robbing Peter to pay Paul. But it's about making sure that people have a decent standard of living, that they can afford the basics right now. Food is expensive, heating's expensive, price at the pumps is expensive, and it's hard. It's hard for lots and lots of people.
Given what we've seen with gas and oil prices in the past few months, and given what has been the rise in heating bills and various other things that sort of protected the island a little bit in some gas, but electricity is a bit high. Do you think that coming into this, you need a government that is willing to go down the route of issuing targeted support in going into this winter? Do you think that is something that is going to be something that has to happen?
I think it does have to happen. Obviously, we've seen a slight decrease in the prices of fuel at the pumps. Obviously, I have an oil boiler at home, and until I actually go and buy again from the provider, I won't actually know what the cost will be. But as you say, obviously, we have got a lot of vulnerable people in society, and we have to make sure that we can help them get through a winter. If it's a long, cold winter, and you can't afford to heat your house, that's really not a place that we want people on the Isle of Man to be in. And, we have to do something to help them. But it's also about, obviously, we help our most vulnerable, but there's also a swathe of the population we generally tend to overlook. And that is the people who maybe live alone, only have one income coming in, single people. They always seem to get forgotten about. But we have got limited refunds, that we can issue out to people. But, it's just about trying to help everybody, really. And, yeah, I don't know.
Just finally, as we cross into the final minute here, what would be your message to the voters in Garff?
I think in Garff, we've been missing a voice in Tynwald. I really do think we have. I think we've all felt a little bit of unrepresented, from our previous MHKs. And I think if we want to see improvements and we want to feel that government is working for everybody, but Tynwald is also working as a collaborative one, then we need change. And I think to get that change, we need to put new people in there.
That was Aishlinn Creer, who's standing for election in Garff. Also standing in the constituency are Anthony Allen, Sean Bostrom, Daphne Caine, Vicki Hewison, Peter Kermeen and Martyn Perkins. You can listen back to this interview along with all the others recorded as part of this series shortly after broadcast from your usual podcast provider. And don't forget, our dedicated election website has everything you need to know, and you can find it at manxradio.com.